Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Renu Kataria and with me is Nipunika Shahid bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. UN Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee meeting adopts Delhi Declaration calls for zero tolerance towards terrorism. India says use of new emerging technologies by non-state actors pose serious challenge before security architecture. India condemns terror attack at Shah-e-Chirag Shrine in Iran. US announces $275 million additional military assistance for Ukraine. Indian government extends ban on sugar exports for another year. Tropical storm Nalgae hit the Philippines, killing 45 people so far. In French Open badminton, Indian pair of Satvik Sairaj Rankireddy and Chirag Shetty storm into men's doubles final. And in T20 Cricket World Cup, New Zealand beat Sri Lanka by 65 runs at Sydney. India to take on South Africa in a crucial match of Super 12 stage at Perth on Sunday. United Nations Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee has adopted the Delhi Declaration on countering the use of new and emerging technologies for terrorist purposes. The Delhi Declaration was adopted in the special meeting of the committee held in New Delhi on Saturday. In the Delhi Declaration, the committee has urged all member states to ensure zero tolerance towards terrorism, consistent with their obligations under international laws, including human rights law, international humanitarian law, and international refugees law. It has called for taking urgent action to prevent and counter terrorism in all its forms and manifestations through the full and effective implementation of Security Council resolutions and other relevant international instruments relating to terrorism. The declaration reaffirms that terrorism should not be associated with any religion, nationality, civilization or ethnic group. It has also called upon member states to fulfill their obligations enshrined in relevant international counter-terrorism conventions and protocols to which they are a party. It has also underscored the obligation of member states to prevent and suppress the financing of terrorist acts and to refrain from providing any form of support, active or passive, to entities or persons involved in terrorist acts. In the Delhi Declaration, the committee has reaffirmed that terrorism in all forms constitutes one of the most serious threats to international peace and security and vowed to contribute further to enhancing the effectiveness of the overall effort to fight the scourge on the global level. India on Saturday said that threat of terrorism is growing and expanding in Asia and Africa, and new emerging technologies have posed a serious challenge before the security architecture. External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, said terrorism remains one of the gravest threats to humanity. Dr. S. Jaishankar was speaking at the plenary session of United Nations Security Council's special meeting of Counter-Terrorism Committee on countering the use of new and emerging technologies for terrorist purposes in New Delhi. He said new emerging technologies like virtual private networks, encrypted messaging services, virtual currencies have thrown up new challenges for the governments and regulatory bodies due to their vulnerability for misuse by non-state actors. He said terrorist and lone wolf attackers enhanced their capabilities by gaining access to new technologies in recent years. He said they use technologies and money to attack freedom, tolerance and progress. The External Affairs Minister pointed out that Internet and social media platforms have turned into potent instruments in the toolkit of terrorist and militant groups for spreading propaganda, radicalization and conspiracy theories aimed at destabilizing societies. Dr. Jaishankar said counterterrorism has become one of the top priorities during countries' present tenure in United Nations Security Council. The UN Security Council has evolved an important architecture built primarily around the counterterrorism sanctions regime to combat terrorism. He said this has been very effective in putting those countries on notice that had turned terrorism into a state-funded enterprise.
The Council is holding this special meeting of its Counter-Terrorism Committee in India is also a product of the fact that counter-terrorism has become one of the top priorities during our ongoing tenure in the Security Council. Terrorism remains one of the gravest threats to humanity. The UN Security Council in the past 2 decades has evolved an important architecture built primarily around the counter-terrorism sanctions regime to combat this menace. This has been very effective in putting those countries on notice that had turned terrorism into a state-funded enterprise.
Dr. Jaishankar reaffirmed India's commitment to strengthen international efforts to combat terrorism, including combating the use of new and emerging technologies.
In recent years, terrorist groups, their ideological fellow travelers, and lone wolf attackers have significantly enhanced their capabilities by gaining access to these technologies. They use technology and money, and most importantly, the ethos of open societies to attack freedom, tolerance, and progress. Internet and social media platforms have turned into potent instruments in the toolkit of terrorists and militant groups for spreading propaganda, radicalization, and conspiracy theories aimed at destabilizing societies.
India's External Affairs Minister also highlighted the dangers posed by the use of unmanned aerial systems by terrorist groups and organized criminal networks. Terrorist groups are using unmanned aerial platforms such as drones and quadcopters for cross-border trafficking of drugs and arms and for carrying out terrorist attacks. He said drones have been used by terrorist groups to monitor movements of security forces and UN peacekeepers in Africa, making them vulnerable to terrorist attacks.
These terrorist groups have been using unmanned aerial platforms such as drones and quadcopters for cross-border trafficking of drugs and arms and for carrying out terrorist attacks. And such risks are not limited to India. In Africa, drones have been used by terrorist groups to monitor movements of security forces and even of UN peacekeepers, making them vulnerable to terrorist attacks. A few months ago, terrorists launched cross-border drone attacks on the UAE and Saudi Arabia, targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, which led to loss of lives and injuries, including to Indian nationals there. India has strongly condemned these cross-border drone attacks both in UAE and Saudi Arabia.
India, as the chair of the UNSC's Counter-Terrorism Committee, hosted the special meeting on countering the use of new and emerging technologies for terrorist purposes in New Delhi. The inaugural session of the meeting was held in Mumbai on Friday.
The Indian External Affairs Minister on Saturday met his counterparts from UK, Albania, UAE, Ghana and Gabon on the sidelines of the UNSC special meeting in New Delhi. In a tweet, Dr. Jaishankar said during his talks with UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, they reviewed the progress in Roadmap 2030. The two leaders also discussed the Ukraine conflict and the Indo-Pacific. On his interaction with Deputy Foreign Minister of Albania, Megi Fino, Dr. Jaishankar said her participation at the UNSC special meeting reflected their excellent cooperation during India's UNSC tenure. The two leaders discussed exploring the full potential of bilateral relationship. They also agreed to cooperate closely in multilateral forums. On his meeting with UAE Minister of State for International Cooperation Reem Al Hashmi, India's External Affairs Minister said her participation at the UNSC special meeting reflects the trust of their comprehensive strategic partnership. The two leaders discussed shared threat terrorism poses to the world and the global responses. After meeting his Gabon counterpart, Michael Moussa Damo, Dr. Jaishankar said he is encouraged by the growing Indian economic presence in Gabon. Both ministers committed themselves to expanding bilateral cooperation, including the development partnership. The External Affairs Minister said they will work closely together in the UN, Commonwealth and other multilateral forums. Dr. S. Jaishankar thanked his Ghana counterpart for her active participation in the UNSC special meeting. He said India and Ghana's historical solidarity guides the common efforts to work for the people. He stated that Ghana's One Village, One Dam and India's Amrit Sarovar initiatives are an apt example of this. India's External Affairs Minister also spoke with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He thanked Mr. Blinken for his strong and clear message on Friday on counter-terrorism and 26/11 accountability. The two leaders discussed the Ukraine conflict and other regional issues during their talks. Speaking at the inaugural session in Mumbai on Friday, U.S. Secretary of State said the perpetrators of the 2008 carnage must be brought to justice.
We have a responsibility to the victims and to people everywhere to bring justice to the perpetrators of the Mumbai attacks, including their masterminds. Because when we allow the architects of these attacks to go unpunished, we send a message to terrorists everywhere that their heinous crimes will be tolerated. Many members of the Security Council, including the United States, have adopted our own sanctions against the terrorists behind these attacks. But our accountability efforts are more effective when we act together, which is why we've worked with India to put forward nominations to designate several terrorists through the UN 1267 committee. All relevant parties should support these designations. No nation should stand in their way.
Heads of delegations of the United Nations Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee called on President of India Draupadi Murmu at the Rashtrapati Bhavan in New Delhi on Saturday. Welcoming the delegation members, the President appreciated their gesture of commencing their visit by paying tributes to the 26/11 victims in Mumbai. The President said India, as the world's largest democracy with one of the most open and diverse societies in the world, has been a victim of terrorism for decades. She added that India has a national commitment to fight the evil of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations.
The United States will provide $275 million as additional military assistance to Ukraine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Friday that the package includes ammunition for HIMARS precision rocket launchers, various types of 155 mm artillery rounds, anti-armor systems, small arms ammunition, and 4 satellite communications antennas. The latest aid package brings Washington's total security assistance commitments for Ukraine to more than $18.5 billion since early 2021. Mr. Blinken said they are also working to provide Ukraine with the air defense capabilities it needs. The two initial U.S.-provided NASAMS ready for delivery to Ukraine next month, and we are working with allies and partners to enable delivery of their own air defense systems to Ukraine. Russia said on Saturday it was suspending its participation in the agreement that allowed grain exports from Ukraine, blaming alleged drone attacks on Russian ships in Crimea. The Russian Defense Ministry announced the decision on social media platforms. Earlier, the Russian military blamed Ukraine and Britain for a massive drone attack on its Black Sea fleet in Crimea, a peninsula annexed by Moscow, which it said caused minor damage to one of its ships. London has denied the involvement.
The Indian government has extended the restriction on export of sugar for 1 more year starting from 31st of this month to raise its availability in domestic markets and control prices. The Directorate General of Foreign Trade in a notification said that restriction on export of sugar, including raw, refined and white, will remain in force from 31st of October this year to 31st of October 2023. As per the notification, the restriction is not applicable to sugar being exported to European Union and USA. India has urged its business community to be partners in making the country a developed nation by 2047 as part of the Vision of 5 Resolves proposed by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Interacting with members of the Federation of Telangana, Chambers of Commerce and Industry, FTCCI, in Indian city of Hyderabad on Friday, the minister emphasized on the need to enhance quality, to tap the international opportunities and asked them to make standards in quality control a part of work culture. Referring to exports, Mr. Goel said the exports this year are likely to touch $750 billion as against $675 billion last year. Mr. Goel asked the cotton industry stakeholders to discuss a strategy to ensure traceability of cotton, get better value of cotton products and brandize Indian cotton. He said blockchain technology for enhancing traceability of cotton from farm to foreign is under consideration and it will be tried on small scale initially and later expanded. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you news commentary on India's ITEC program, Skilling Our Partners.
The Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation ITEC program was instituted by Cabinet decision in September 1964 as a bilateral program of assistance of the Government of India. The decision regarding setting up the ITEC program was predicated on the underlying belief that it was necessary to establish relations of mutual concern and interdependence based not only on commonly held ideals and aspirations but also on solid economic foundations. Technical and economic cooperation was considered to be one of the essential functions of an integrated and imaginative foreign policy. The ITEC program is essentially bilateral in nature. However, in recent years, ITEC resources have also been used for cooperation programs conceived in regional and inter-regional context, such as Economic Commission for Africa, Commonwealth Secretariat, UNIDO, Group of 77 and G15. In recent years, its activities have also been associated with regional and multilateral organizations and cooperation groupings like Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, BIMSTEC, Mekong Ganga Cooperation, MGC, African Union, AU, Afro-Asian Rural Development Organization, AARDO, Pan-African Parliament, Caribbean Community, CARICOM, World Trade Organization, WTO, and Indian Ocean Rim Association for Regional Cooperation, IOR-ARC, and India-Africa Forum Summit. The ITEC program is fully funded by the Government of India. It has evolved over the years. Under ITEC, 161 countries in Asia, Africa, East Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean, as well as Pacific and small island countries are invited to share in the Indian developmental experience acquired over 6 decades of India's existence as a free nation. As a result of different activities under this program, there is now a visible and growing awareness among other countries about the competence of India as a provider of technical know-how and expertise, as well as training opportunities, consultancy services, and feasibility studies. These programs have generated immense goodwill and substantive cooperation among the developing countries. Training or capacity building is one of the major activities under ITEC. The professionals and people from developing countries are offered unique training courses, both civilian and defense, in different centers of excellence in India, which empower them with not just professional skills, but prepare them for an increasingly globalized world. In civilian training program, around 12,000 scholarships are being offered to ITEC partner countries to attend the various training courses in India. The premier institutions of India offer more than 300 short-term, medium-term and long-term courses during the year. The training program is demand-driven and subjects selected are of interest to developing countries for their working professionals. The wide and diverse spectrum of skills and disciplines offered ranges from IT to rural development, parliamentary practices to entrepreneurship, marine to aeronautical engineering. Defense training covers training of personnel belonging to all the 3 wings of defense services, viz. Army, Air Force and Navy, nominated by the ITEC partner countries in prestigious institutions like the National Defense College, Defense Services Staff College, etc. The facility is also extended and availed of by some select developed countries on self-financing basis. Indian experts are deputed to friendly countries on their request to assist in developmental activities. The experts study the problems and suggest solutions without disturbing the local socio-economic and cultural environment. Some of the fields covered in recent years have been creative arts, pest management, military training, IT, audit, medicine, English teaching, telecommunications, agricultural research, etc. Being a founder member of the Colombo Plan, India is extending technical cooperation and assistance to Colombo Plan countries since 1950 under Technical Cooperation Scheme of Colombo Plan. Through the scheme, India provides comprehensive and integrated training to participants from Asian member countries of Colombo Plan with the purpose of assisting them to enhance the administrative and technical capabilities through human resource development. ITEC is the flagship program of the Indian government's capacity building effort, not only because of its magnitude and wide geographical coverage, but also for innovative forms of technical cooperation. The ITEC program is a visible symbol of India's role and contribution to South-South cooperation. It furthers national development priorities of India's partners and has national ownership at its center. India remains a staunch proponent and practitioner of South-South cooperation, which constitutes a fundamental pillar of India's foreign policy and diplomacy.
India has strongly condemned the terror attack at the Shah Chirag shrine at Shiraz in Iran. The External Affairs Ministry of India in a statement said this heinous attack is another reminder that terrorism continues to pose one of the biggest and critical threats to international peace and security. It said the need of the hour is for countries of the world to unite and combat terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. India has extended its deep condolences to the families of the victims and the people of Iran.
This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter @AIR News Alerts. Severe tropical storm Nalgi slammed into the Philippines on Saturday, unleashing flash floods and landslides in southern provinces that left at least 45 people dead. Heavy rains and strong winds pounded the capital Manila and surrounded areas for most of Saturday as Tropical Storm Nalgi forced tens of thousands of people to leave their homes and disrupted peak holiday travel in much of the nation. The storm pounded the country's main island of Luzon with maximum winds of 95 kilometers per hour after making landfall on the sparsely populated Catanduanes Island before dawn. The country's disaster agency spokesperson said on Saturday that Maguindanao province was the most affected. He said 33 people were injured and 17 persons were missing in the wake of the storm. Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has ordered urgent aid distribution in a southern province where landslides have been triggered by tropical storm.
The UN peacekeeping mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo on Saturday announced an increase in its troop alert level following deadly clashes with rebels in the east. United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, MONUSCO, condemned the hostile acts of the M23 rebel group and called for an immediate halt to the fighting. The mission said it was providing air support, intelligence and equipment as well as medical assistance to the DRC's army. The peacekeepers said they were mobilized in support of the FARDC army that clashed this week with the M23 around a strategic highway in which at least 10 people have been killed since Sunday and dozens more injured. MONUSCO said it had set up an operations coordination center with the army and was carrying out reconnaissance and surveillance flights but did not provide further details about the alert level. M23, mostly Congolese Tutsi group, resumed fighting in the late 2021 after lying dormant for years. It has since captured swathes of territory in North Kivu province, including the strategic town of Bunagana on the Ugandan border in June this year. 2 car bomb explosions at the Education Ministry in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, killed and wounded scores of people on Saturday. The first explosion hit the ministry, then the second blast occurred as ambulances arrived and people gathered to help the victims. It was not known who was behind the blast, but the Islamist group Al-Shabaab frequently carries out bombings and gun attacks in Mogadishu and elsewhere.
U.S. President Joe Biden will attend next month's COP27 United Nations Climate Summit in Egypt. The conference will be held in the Red Sea resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. The White House said in a statement on Friday that President Biden will advance the global climate fight and help the most vulnerable build resilience to climate impacts, and he will highlight the need for the world to act in this decisive decade. The U.S. President will be at the summit on 11th of November before heading to Cambodia for the annual U.S.-ASEAN summit and then on to Indonesia for a G20 summit. The White House said Mr. Biden will work with G20 partners to address key challenges such as climate change, the global impact of Russian-Ukraine conflict, including on energy and food security and affordability, and a range of other priorities. COP26 last year ended with a pledge to keep global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels, a goal the world is set to miss on current emission trends. Paul Pelosi, husband of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was attacked using a hammer at his California home on Friday morning, has undergone surgery for a skull fracture and other severe injuries. Drew Hamill, spokesperson for Speaker Nancy Pelosi, said in a statement that Mr. Pelosi was admitted to Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital, where he underwent successful surgery to repair a skull fracture and serious injuries to his right arm and hands. Paul Pelosi was attacked with a hammer in their home in San Francisco, California. The attacker was a male assailant who also tried to tie up Pelosi's husband as he was waiting for Nancy to arrive home, is facing charges of attempted murder and other felonies.
Hannah Goslar, one of Anne Frank's best friends who, like her, was held in the Bergen-Belsen Nazi concentration camp during World War II, died on Friday at the age of 93. Frank, a young Jewish girl who died aged 15 in the Bergen-Belsen camp, is known worldwide for her powerful diary written between 1942 and 1944. Goslar was born in 1928. Her family fled Nazi Germany in 1933 and settled in Amsterdam, where she met Frank at school. The two girls lost touch in 1942 when Anne Frank's family went into hiding to escape the Nazis. Goslar and her family were arrested by the Gestapo, the political police of Nazi Germany, in 1943 and deported to Bergen-Belsen the following year. There she met Frank again in February 1945, just before her friend's death. Goslar and her sister Gabi were the only members of their family to survive. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Saturday spoke to the Amir of the State of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, and conveyed his best wishes for the successful conduct of FIFA World Cup 2022 to be played from 20th November to 18th of December. In a tweet, Mr. Modi thanked the Amir of Qatar for his gracious Diwali greetings. The Prime Minister said both the countries have also agreed to jointly celebrate completion of 50 years of India-Qatar diplomatic relations in 2023.
In badminton, India's Chirag Shetty and Satvik Sairaj Rankireddy stormed into the men's doubles final of the French Open tournament. The Indian pair defeated South Korea's Choi Sol-gyu and Kim Won-ho 21-18, 21-14 in the semi-finals in Paris on Saturday. In cricket, India will face South Africa in Super 12 stage of Men's T20 World Cup in Perth on Sunday. So far in the T20 World Cup, India has defeated Pakistan and the Netherlands. Their match against South Africa will be a battle between equals because the conditions in Perth will suit the Proteas. Earlier on Saturday, New Zealand defeated Sri Lanka by 65 runs at the Sydney Cricket Ground in the other match of Super 12 stage.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Financial Times in a lead item says German President Steinmeier admits bitter failure of policy on Russia. The Guardian writes that goal of limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees centigrade more fragile than ever, says COP27 chair.
The Wall Street Journal reports that economic pressures weigh on voters in final midterm campaign stretch. The Washington Post, quoting a report, says desperate for allies, Russia cultivates ties with Iran and Saudi Arabia.
The Globe and Mail reports that oldest prisoner freed from Guantanamo Bay back home in Pakistan. The New York Times says another Israeli election looms and a familiar face plans a comeback.
Japan Times informs that Japan's ruling parties may seek to extend parliament to pass key bills. South China Morning Post writes that Biden condemns political violence after attack on U.S. House Speaker's husband Paul Pelosi.
A quick look at the headlines once again. UN Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee meeting adopts Delhi Declaration, calls for zero tolerance towards terrorism. India says use of new emerging technologies by non-state actors pose serious challenge before security architecture. India condemns terror attack at Shah Chirag Shrine in Iran. U.S. announces $275 million additional military assistance for Ukraine. Indian government extends ban on sugar exports for another year. Tropical storm Nalgi hit the Philippines, killing 45 people so far. In French Open badminton, Indian pair of Satvik Sairaj Rankireddy and Chirag Shetty storm into men's doubles final. And in T20 Cricket World Cup, New Zealand beat Sri Lanka by 65 runs at Sydney. India to take on South Africa in a crucial match of Super 12 stage at Perth on Sunday. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favourite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Kenya. And with that, we end this bulletin. We will be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.